Hello, everyone. Here we have a really nice guest, Thomas Celvi, a really good engineer, one of the best software engineer that I ever met. So, how are you, Thomas?
I'm doing good, Roto. Thank you for inviting me onto your channel here, and I am humbled and appreciate that you say those very kind words about me. Not
That's
every day
let
feels
it
that
be.
way, but it's nice when your colleagues and peers can say
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, so you are a really experienced engineer. So, can you tell to the people how to survive to this industry because sometimes it's really tough and
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because each person's path is a little bit different and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. I When I started engineering, I was very good scholastically. Like I did really well in school. I graduated in the top 1% of my class across all science fields. So it wasn't just computer science. It was like biology and anything else that would make it up. Um and I left the school thinking, I'm awesome. Like there's no way I don't succeed. Who wouldn't want me? Who wouldn't? And I didn't have any experience. I spent all my time in school having fun and just focusing on school, which isn't a bad thing. It isn't a bad thing. But I never really got out into the real world until after that. And that's a different place. It's a very, very different thing. And I got kind of lucky in the beginning. My very first job, uh, my father's an engineer, and he gave me an opportunity at a company that he was working at that his friend owned. And that was my very first job. And it was part time. So it wasn't too big. And I did a few things there, but I had no experience. So it was almost like my internship after college. And then I moved and I kind of went off of the cliff and I had to make it for myself. And that was a really hard transition. And I remember thinking, I'm awesome. Why don't people want me? Why? What is it? What is it? What is it going to take? And I eventually got a job. And it was at a company where I was the only software engineer. They
wow,
just
really tough,
needed.
really tough.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because the the thing is you have you learn the fastest from other people. That's the fastest way to accrue knowledge. You watch a YouTube video or you work with someone and they show you something new or you get a code review or something like that and you learn something new. And uh this role at the time, because of my attitude, suited me, but I wasn't going to grow very fast. Um, and I remember that I didn't love the work. I learned a lot of things, not engineering based. It was a consulting company, and it was a good consulting company. But I learned how to be a consultant, which is
Okay.
different than just being an engineer. You learn a
And
lot of. Go ahead.
what kind of stack did you use in this consulting company?
Okay, so that's a fun question. This is pretty long ago. This is like 2007, 2006 time frame.
Okay, I was a kid.
So yeah, so the idea of stack almost didn't exist. It was a Microsoft shop, but there weren't as many tiers. There was basically SQL Server and something on the front. It was in the financial services industry, so that's where the consulting part came in because that's a very specific industry, and knowing accounting and all the laws and rules and specific systems helps you get your foot in the door. And my role was to add the customization in between the standards. Um, but it it was also at a time when the web was very different. People were still doing server side rendering. Microsoft technology hadn't even implemented MVC yet. That didn't exist, you know. I think that when I started, they were still doing ASP, active server page, or something like that technology. And my first web app was an ASP.NET 1.1. And this is a miserable technology. This, like, you go and you put something on a page, and everything that you do, it wants to post back to the server. There's no JavaScript, very little, not, I shouldn't say no, but there's very little JavaScript or client side implementation. And it's keeping track of your state because Microsoft knows they have to scale, and they know that server side scaling is not really going to work in the long run for what they're trying to do. They put everything in a view state variable. So when you open up these pages, there's this very long base 64 encoded string of just garbage. That's just the state of the page, which you already have. But so the to ask that was the stack that I was on: SQL Server and ASP.NET, and transitioned through that for quite a while. I really gained my footing on Microsoft technology, C#, SQL Server, the ASP technologies. My most fun time in my career, I was probably Silverlight. Silverlight was incredible. It was like JavaScript without all the bad stuff, but some of the bad stuff, I guess. I don't really know, but that moment was when I really made my transition from when I picked up Silverlight. And this kind of gets down to your original question of how to survive and where I started and where I ended up. I went in for an interview one time for a job I wasn't qualified for. And I walked into the interview fairly confident I would get the job. And I walked out of the interview an hour later knowing that I didn't get the job. And it was the biggest failure I've ever had. I'd always been good at taking tests. Interviews are like tests. And I was really good at school because I figured out how to take tests. I don't know anything about ecology or whatever class I took. I don't know any of it today. I was just good at taking the test. And that was painful.
And this interview was about data structures and algorithms, or different stuff because
Good question. So I was trying to make a transition from this Microsoft data driven world into graphics, into rendering. It was in the gaming.
Okay.
It was in the gaming industry. And it was something that I had like studied in college, and it was something I really enjoyed. And like I like math, and so I'm like, I can do this. And I went in, and the questions they asked me on the tests, at least on the domain knowledge stuff, very difficult. I actually did okay on it. I think I did okay on that part. But then they had me sit down and they wanted me to write a little bit of C++ code. And it was something really easy. And I had put on my resume, I do C++, and I had done some in the past, but it's not what I spend all day doing. I couldn't do a simple problem. And here's the thing that's interesting about it. This company at the time, they turned off the internet. You had to take the test without any resources. Yeah, no Stack Overflow, nothing. You couldn't just go in and so it was either literally you knew how to do this, and it was a simple question. Like, I look back at the question and I'm like, crap, if I can't answer that, I don't know C++, and I couldn't answer it. And for an hour, I sat there trying to uh, like convert a string buffer. I don't even remember the question. It was something really simple though. And then after that, I was deflated. Then they do the personality portion of the interview, but I was so like, oh, I couldn't do it. That like, there's no way I'm getting through that session. Um, that was rough. And then I did a few more jobs, and then I went to another company and did Silverlight, and I really loved Silverlight. Uh, it was at the time that the web was really gaining traction, and it just
What
didn't have.
time?
This was roughly 2011.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's about 5 years later. So the interview I mentioned was like 2009-ish time frame. Silverlight was about 2011. There was some work in between, but nothing really interesting. But I picked it up because I really wanted to do front end work, and Silverlight had MVVM as a technology, model view model, which had like two-way binding, and there was this real focus on user experience and doing something fun and interactive. Whereas most of my time in the Microsoft stack was just, we can get the data to and from the server, like that was it. If you could save the data, you were good. There was no concern for whether or not anybody enjoyed it. But so I picked this up, and I had actually quit my job and picked up some contracts, and then started studying Silverlight, and realized I couldn't make it as a contractor on my own. I hated running a business. I hated it. Absolutely hated it. It
Why?
just,
Why?
I'm not good at. There are certain things that people that are good at business do that just aren't engineering or anything like that. They're very numbers oriented. It's very bottom line. They don't. If you're good at running a business, your end goal is always black or red on the number sheet. Am I black or am I red? Number two, people that are good at running a business are good at interacting with people and meeting people and building their network, and it almost comes without energy, like they can do this effortlessly. And I'm kind of an introvert,
Okay.
and going out and meeting people and interacting with people costs energy. It's exhausting. Hardest part of my day at work, Roto, is doing the meetings. Hardest part, hands down. After 3 or 4 hours of meetings, I'm like, hey, I'm done. I'm spent. I could sit there and code for 12, 16 hours. I could do meetings for 2 or 3 hours. And
12, 16 hours coding?
if I need to, yeah, that's not a problem. But it doesn't exert the same amount. But sitting in meetings and like being, working with people and dealing with people and being pleasant and thinking through things on the spot, because that's what meetings are. Like, you have to think through things on the spot, and you can't always say what's on your mind. You gotta say it differently or phrase it differently or translate it. Like you can't speak to your product manager, and every time you do, they're like, I don't understand that. And it's really challenging. So the level of energy into that is different than the level of energy into an engineering exercise. But yeah, so that's why I don't really like running a business. There are people that can do that effortlessly. That the numbers are what really matters, not the philosophy or anything like that. And they really, really like meeting people, working
Yeah.
with people. It's effortless, because that's just not where I excel. Um, but so I did Silverlight, and I got into a company that did, you know, user experience work. First time I ever seen it was agency work. And this then brought me back to I'm awesome. I'm amazing. I feel
you
amazing
reco-
and
you
awesome.
recover
Yeah.
your
I recovered my self-esteem and ego, and it's more ego than self-esteem. And so I do that for a little bit, and then the company gets sold. Uh, and we go to another company that, not a bad company, just more into the notion that everybody kind of wants to be a partner in the business. So we're now back to running our own business. You're in a company, but you're almost like representing your little business in the company. Hated that. I had to get out. Um, and so I went back to a job where, even though I wasn't the only engineer on the team, I was the only person doing the work that I was doing on the team. It was hard. I liked working with the people there. That was a really fun company. It was on the fringe of an industry that I wanted to work on, but I wasn't growing. I was getting stagnant. Um,
And I want to ask you, how how do you realize that you are not growing or that you are stuck?
you, you don't feel challenged. Number one, you just kind of go in and do the same things you always did. It's too effortless. You know what I mean? Like you go in and you don't even have to think through it. Number two, you don't you don't fail. Um,
But
anything anything. Go ahead.
um, like you just mentioned that I don't know, you need to kind of fail and you need to be challenging.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know, a lot of people want to have a job, a really easy job, and earn a lot of money.
Yeah.
But
Okay. So
you are
that's
saying that that is not the path. So,
it depends. I think you can have a really easy job and be secure, but you're not going to make a lot of money. You're going to be stable. Like you could at least in the US, you could get a job, and I had one for a little bit where you could make $80,000 a year. You'd make $80,000 a year for the rest of your life. You'd never get fired. You'd never learn anything new, and then you'd retire. And for some people, that's awesome. Some people, that's what they
yeah.
want. Your focus is somewhere else. Maybe you got a side business. Maybe you got 12 kids at home. I have no idea. I don't know. Not fulfilling for me. Um, the To your question of like, how do you know that you're not growing? You, at least in my mind, and this is for the career only, like you got your personal life and maybe you got another kid or something. I don't know what it is. That's a different type of growth. But uh you you have to be challenged and you have to feel like you're risking something. um and there has to be some notion that you can fail. Like if it's good enough to where you're uncomfortable and you don't know what the future might bring, and you might write that code or present that thing 4 or 5 times before you get it right, that's when you're growing.
Mm.
You did it. You got your hands dirty. You learned along the way. Now, why that's important in technology is technology changes every couple years. um Technologies I was using even 3 or 4 years ago aren't used today. Technologies, Silverlight's dead. I just talked about Silverlight for a little bit in
So
2011.
what?
By 2004, I learned it in 2011. It died in 2012. I had to figure out some other things, other technologies I learned along the way. I learned Knockout, dead. I learned gosh, I can't even think of the name. It was another MVVM web technology. I learned three or four frameworks, all dead between 2011 and 2014. I did WPF for a little bit. I mean, people still do WPF, but I'm not putting it on my resume.
I
Yeah.
never heard about that name
WPF, Windows
because
Presentation Framework. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
no,
I'm
no.
not saying do it. I'm not saying do it, but uh yeah, you
Actually, I don't like to code in Windows. Like I had
yeah,
a Windows machine and a lot of errors, especially when I was working with Ruby on Rails. I don't know if you know that technology. So I decided
I've never
to.
worked with Ruby. I'm sorry. I don't know. Actually, it's actually probably pretty cool. I've seen some posts. I've never worked with it though.
It's similar to Python, similar to Python. So I don't know. I don't like Windows to code. What was your experience? Because
It was
right now,
great. It
yeah,
was great for a while. It really was. I mean, if you look at the history of technology, and this is where I'm kind of like a dinosaur a bit in the industry, from the middle 90s through the early 2000s, everything was Windows. I mean, I was working on web technology when Internet Explorer was dominant. Like
yeah,
so like Windows was great, and that changed. Chrome changed that. Linux and cloud technology changed that. Like when you went into a lot of server rooms at the earlier portions of my career, they were all running Windows.
wow,
Now you're in the cloud and everybody's running Linux.
yeah,
And your web technologies have shifted from Internet Explorer to Safari being an important one because of iOS, and Chrome being the dominant one, Firefox being shared between platforms. But what that means is a computer that can run its base OS and some sort of Linux shell or Unix shell actually more valuable in the run. And so Mac kind of became the preferred, you know,
and what about this
computer for
Mac
engineering.
trend in US? Because it appears Steve Jobs and everyone's want a Mac and uh,
Uh, I I'm fine with Mac or Windows, and the the thing that makes that true today isn't that Mac made any changes, it's that Windows brought Linux into its shell.
yeah,
Because now I can start doing all of that cloud build server scripty stuff that gets me from local development into where I'm actually going to host it. It's now there. Whereas before it wasn't there. Like that was one of the challenges of Windows, is like you wanted to, because Windows is expensive to host. You host Windows machines in the cloud and you're probably paying triple the price of a Linux machine. And so your company is like, can we get this over to Linux? And then even if they don't ask and you get them over to Linux, they're like, high five, nice job, cost is down. And so it becomes like prohibitive if you can't do that. And Mac always had that. Mac's always got that terminal that's like Unix based or something like that. I don't even know if it's Unix or Linux. I have no idea, but it crosses over very well. It's very natural. And Windows had to release like its own, it's got like Linux subsystem for Windows, and like you install it, and
yeah.
then you do some configuration and you can finally use it, and it's becoming more and more natural on Windows. But that's also the initiative of their cloud business. Azure's the number two cloud provider in the world behind AWS, and they got there by supporting that, and so their tooling has to reflect it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have a Windows machine, just in case, you know. Right now in the world, whatever thing can happen. So, in this long road that you have been, uh,
Yeah.
what things uh, have you learned? Like,
All right. So I'm glad you brought us back to it. So
yeah.
that company, if we go back to my story, I left and I got back into a company where I'm like kind of doing my own thing, but not growing. And I went and interviewed with that same company that I failed with.
Oh, wow.
Went back and interviewed with them. And at this time, I'm feeling good about myself. And I'm confident. I'm looking at the role. I'm like, I can do this role. Like, this isn't the C++ role. This is my wheelhouse. And I get a, I eventually pushed my way in the door. Like, I had to keep contacting the recruiter and get the phone interview. And they said no. Um, why did they say no? I was qualified. I was using their exact tool set. I wasn't looking for a job above my skill level. Why did they say no? The heck? And then I fast forward, and I'm just going to skip a few jobs. I've had several. Uh, I fast forward to right before my current job, and the time frame. So that was 2014. I started my current job in 2019, late 2019. Fast forward until then, and as I'm going for my current job, I decide to interview with the same company for a third time. I wanted to see if I
But
could.
why did you want that? Basically, like for an ego thing, or what was the point? Because uh, I don't know if you want to really work in that company.
Uh, I always wanted to work in that industry specifically. I was very curious. It's why I got into software to begin with, and I've never worked in that industry. Um,
in
but
the
I also
game industry.
in the gaming industry,
Okay.
yeah. But I also wanted to see, can I make it? Can I actually make it? Some things that happened along the way that had changed me, personal things, and I had started to view myself differently. Uh, and that time that I did the interview, I made it all the way to the end, and we were talking about offers. I didn't take the offer. It wasn't going to pay me as much money. It wasn't going to make me as happy, which is an interesting realization. But what I found as the missing ingredient and what had happened in that 5 years between 2014 and 2019 is I realized I needed to be able to say a simple phrase, and that phrase was "you're right." 2 words. Well, compound word, you are, but you're.
Yeah.
You are right. Um, and it took humility to get me the job. I had to learn to be comfortable without being the top person in the room or thinking that I was. Um, and that was what sort of limited me. If I go all the way back to my school, I was just competing for a grade. I wasn't looking at going out and actually working with people or getting a job. And my first job wasn't collaborative. And so the first thing I would say, if you want to survive in the industry, be humble. Just know that there's nothing wrong with letting another idea give a shot. You don't always have to have the best idea. You can support another idea. You can try new things. You can say I was wrong. You can tell somebody else they were right. You can tell somebody else that this was a great job. You've done
And
a great job.
don't you have a fear to fail? Like sometimes, I don't know, I am writing the code and I am thinking, oh, if some book comes, I will be fired, and some kind of thoughts.
Roto, that's a really good question, and that would go into my second idea, and that would be, and it's kind of cliche, but be comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to be okay with, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen next. And even if you write perfect code, the business could come in and just change completely. It
Yeah.
could be like we're no longer in the medical industry. We're in this other industry, and we no longer need engineers. At one point, I had to change jobs because I thought that they would contract out my position, even though I was completely successful for 3 years. Um, so life is out of your control, anyways.
Yeah.
What I came to realize after I was able to not have to wrap up my ego in all of it, was that I could find another job. Even if I had that bug and I got fired, um, I'm good enough at the work that I do, and I can bring a positive enough attitude and collaborate well enough with people that I can find another job. And it might not happen right away. And the circumstances might be out of my control, but you get fired or whatever, you're not going to die or anything like that. It's not the end game. And I'll be honest, I've been fired one, two, I've been fired at least from 2 jobs in my technical career and 1 or 2 jobs before my technical career. And the interesting thing about it is you might even learn more from getting fired
Wow.
than not. You come to reflect on, like, why did that happen? And sometimes the answer is it was a decision that you made or an attitude that you had. And other times you're like, you know what, I was miserable at that place, and that's why I'm no longer here. And I've experienced both of those. I had one job where I was let go in 2008 timeframe, and I hated that job, and I succeeded at the projects they gave me, and it was great to get out of there. And I realized that's not the right work for me. And then I had another job, 2015 timeframe, where I got fired, and at the time I was really mad about it, and I bounced back and got another job. But then over time, I was able to look back and be like, it was my attitude. I thought I knew more than I did, and everybody else saw it, and I didn't want to admit it. And it was a humbling experience. It took 2 or 3 years to internalize that, to actually come back and say they were right.
Yeah, sometimes even myself, I don't want to accept things that you are doing, basically. So another question that I want to ask you is about, right now in internet, what stack, what technology do I need to learn in order to be a software engineer, or in order to be a successful software engineer? So
So
regarding this topic, what is your opinion? What do you think?
I don't think that there's a specific one that's better than the other. Um, I think what I would do instead, particularly if you're starting out, if it's your first job or you're earlier in your career, I would pick the portion of the stack that makes you happiest. Is it front end? Is it back end? Is it DevOps? What is it? What is it that makes you happiest? And then I would find a technology within that stack that's easy to learn or that speaks to you, and I would focus on that. And I would do that, and I would specialize in that for the first 2 to 5 years of my career. Uh, that will become the way that you get jobs. If you get let go, you can get another job. It will be the way that you go from junior to mid to senior. Um, because technology is a vast place. So many people want to be like, I'm 24 or 25 and I'm fresh out of college and I'm an architect. And I can appreciate the ambition. You should be ambitious to that. But technology is vast. I learned something, more than one thing, every day. There are so many things that you just don't know, and the more that you learn, the more you realize you don't. There's more you don't know.
Yeah.
It's so hard to know all of it, and so I wouldn't say that there's a right technology answer, or there's, you know, I'd say it's more about a strategy, and knowing a little bit, learning a little bit about yourself. Do I like, what tier of the stack do I like, and what tech is the most, speaks to me the most, and then just focus on that, and realize that in 2 to 5 years of learning it, it's all going to change anyways.
Yeah.
Uh, like you I could be like, you should learn React, and React's great right now, but uh, like I said, I learned Knockout, and like a year later, it was gone. I learned Backbone, and a year later, it was gone. You
Yeah.
gotta you gotta be ready to ready to try new things, but specialize it. So roundabout, pick front end, back end, DevOps. You can go into special spaces like security or computer vision, things like that, but pick something and specialize early, um, and narrow
And
your focus early.
yeah, and what about, because you at the beginning you talk about a lot about soft skills instead of technical skills, instead of
Yeah,
know some technology. So
yeah,
do you really
yeah,
think that soft skills are more valuable than technical skills?
absolutely, absolutely. I'll tell you what, Roto. You know, when I'm being asked, should we hire this person, or do how do you feel about this candidate, or whatever, and I ask myself one question: uh, would I want to work with this person? Um, and that has so little to do with the technical side of it. And the technical side is actually the constant, and it's you can open up a book and you can learn it, and you can put in a few extra hours a night and catch up. There's a creative part to the technical side that's impossible to necessarily just gain. I'll admit that there are people that can see the parts, can see the Legos and put them together in a way that other people couldn't. Definitely exists. Definitely exists. But the vast majority of engineering and technology doesn't require that to be a successful career long engineer. But what's in every business are people, and your relationships with people, how you treat people, and how you help people, and how you react to situations. Uh, that's ultimately what will move you up to the highest chains of a company. What makes you a vice president or a CEO or a manager uh, isn't whether or not you could write the special middle out encoding technology or whatever it is they do in Silicon Valley. It's literally, can I speak the language of multiple departments, and can I manage conflict well? Because conflict is always going to happen. Um, and you have to figure out a way to manage that information. And
I want to ask you something,
yeah,
because you mentioned that there are some engineers that are really good. They see the Legos and they can put together.
yeah,
And have you seen an engineer, a really good engineer, maybe the best engineer that you ever seen, but his or her communication skills were bad? Is, I don't know,
yeah, I have.
what
I,
happens in that case? Like, you want to have this person in your team, but at the same time, the communication skills or the
yeah,
attitude is bad.
there's a couple of different ways I've seen it. I've seen it as an external observer, and that person, while really good on the job and really qualified, uh, took them maybe an extra 10 to 20 years to become chief architect. They were the lead technology person at the end of their career, but they probably could have been the lead technology person 10 to 20 years before that. um, so that's one example. I've also seen that person just get fired.
Wow.
Yeah, like, even if you're really good at putting the Legos together, but you curse at people, or you or don't show up for the meeting or whatever it is, like, people don't want to deal with that. They'd rather and it's sort of a financial mentality, but I'd rather overpay by 10% and have a fixed cost, even though I'm paying more, than sometimes get 200% and sometimes get 10% and have everything in between. I mean, you'd rather have consistent, stable performance and attitude in most cases than the other way around, because
Yeah.
the lows are really low. The highs might be really high, but the lows are really low.
Yeah, yeah. That's a truth. I think you can be really good coding, but I realize with my 1 year of experience that you need to be able to communicate your ideas. At least for me, even it's more difficult because my native language is Spanish, and you need to communicate in English, even in the code. Like, you need to write in English. So yeah, that's true. And we have a couple of minutes, so I want to ask you about your life in Mexico, because I know that you like a lot Mexico.
I do love
So
Mexico. Yeah,
why an American want to go to Mexico? Like,
I well, I got divorced several years ago, and I was actually married to a Brazilian, and my son is half Brazilian. So I have some experience in Latin American culture. And after I got divorced, a year or so later, I wanted to get back out there and date again. And I'm in, Southern California, and Tijuana's not too far away.
and what is, like, what is the difference, or the main difference between American people and Latin American people? What?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, where to begin? Uh, I'll give you a couple that I see. The treatment of time. The treatment of time is vastly different. Americans, everything's got to be on time. At least in the circles that I'm in. If you say 3 p.m., it's starting at 3 p.m. No different. In Latin American culture, if you say 3 p.m., that really means 5 or 6 p.m. And everybody just kind of understands that. Like my in-laws would throw like a kid's birthday party and say be there at 3 p.m. and they're like setting up the party at 3:30 p.m. They know nobody's gonna come. Whereas in the US, you show up at 4 p.m. and the party's, people are already eating cake. So that's one big one. Another interesting one that I've noticed is and I get this more from my, and I don't know if this is everywhere. This may just be a Mexico thing, or this may just
Okay,
be
go ahead, go ahead.
my wife's company that she used to work at. Um, they were a little. There was a bit fewer layers to the filtering in the company environment. America, everything in the workspace was very, very formal. And I'm not saying that means being dressed up. You can show up in shorts and flip flops, but your presentation of character, the words you might choose, the jokes you might tell, very, very formal. And in Mexico, my wife comes home and tells me the story about the stuff that she's talking about in her office, and I'm like, that'd get me fired. That would get me fired. That would get me fired. Certainly wouldn't say that. I'd be fired for that in a heartbeat. So I don't know if that's everywhere. But
Yeah, I realized that that's true. When I went to work in a real office, I realized that people did some really jokes that I thought that I never that I couldn't say. So yeah, there is a lot of, I don't know, like informal jokes and things like that. Yeah.
yeah, and it may boil down to the business culture itself. It may, but I'll give you another example of where this happens in Mexican culture that you would never see this in U.S. culture. And I love tacos, so one of the reasons why I love going to Tijuana is I get the world's best tacos, in my opinion, at a very affordable price. And I love it, and I look forward to it every time I go. But when I show up to the taquero, who's could be in an actual restaurant or could just be on the street cooking tacos, he'll say something like "Hola, güero," and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and güero is like, and I don't know if it's this way in every culture, but
A
it's like
blonde,
blonde person.
yeah,
Yeah.
blonde
Yeah,
person.
basically like a blonde white person. I'm not blonde. I'm not white. I mean, I'm white, but I'm not like blonde or anything. And uh, you'd never do that at an American restaurant. You'd never be like, hey, brown guy. Like that would never happen. Totally okay in Mexico, and I'm okay with it. I joke with my wife that like that's my pet name at the taquero. Like we know each other.
Yeah.
He's taquero and I'm güero, and we have a personal relationship. We don't at all. He calls everybody güero, but whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fun fact. Güero, yeah, is a blonde person. Here in Chile, is güero is not a frequently word, but in Mexico, I know that is a really common word. Yeah, so
Some people name their whole business off of it. I've driven by signs when they're like, burritos al güero, and like that's their business
yeah,
name.
that is the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
know that. Well, we are on time, so thank you for coming. Do you have something to say? Last words? I don't know. Some recommendation to this audience?
Yeah. I have a couple things to say. Roto, thank you for inviting me and letting me ramble on about my career, and hopefully some of my lessons will help people not make the same mistakes. And it's humbling that you would think that maybe I'm a good person for that advice. Um, I would leave people with uh, if you want to get rich or you want to try something crazy or whatever it is, do it do it when you're young. Do it before you have a house. Do it before you have financial obligations, before you have kids, before you have a wife. Because as you get further on in your career and you have all these other things, which are amazing, don't get me wrong, these are all amazing things. It's harder to take that chance. And you're also older. I had way more energy at 25 than I do at 40. So take risks when you have less to lose, and it's physically and mentally easier to do. And don't be afraid of it, because I think in the US, I heard at some point the average millionaire has filed bankruptcy 7 times before they're a millionaire, which is an interesting fact. I don't know if that's still true, but that means that those people lost it all 7 times before they became wealthy, and that's kind of reassuring. So
Yeah, maybe you need to fail in order to become successful, and make sense to be, poor at the beginning or a lot of times, and then,
well,
and then rich.
I think that's one way to describe it. The other way might be the knowledge you gain through failure is
Yeah,
just as valuable or more valuable than what you gain through success. Like each time you try, you learn and experience more, and it's all valuable.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, it was a really good advice. So thank you for coming again, and see you the next edition.
All right. Thank you, Roto. Have a good one.
Bye.